Welcome to the Free to Suffer podcast with Martin and Ricardo. Ever wonder why we're compelled to avoid suffering?
In this podcast, we'll address the stigma of negative feelings and try to help everyone improve their well-being by learning to accept suffering and to get good at feeling.
We are Martin and Ricardo, two longtime friends, both interested in topics related to mental health and positive psychology. Ricardo is a retired mental health counselor, student of Rupert Spira and other teachers of awareness, and nonviolent man of action.
Martin is a lifelong martial artist, former cancer health researcher, dedicated to education and helping people to be their best.
We're always looking for interesting topics for our episodes, so if you have a topic you'd like to suggest, we invite you to send it to us or post it to our comments.
We're glad to have you with us and hope you find some use and meaning in this episode.
All right, so here we are again for episode 2. Ricardo, Martin.
Hi, Martin. I'm looking forward to this. I was interested in hearing a little bit more about what was on your mind, or maybe what's on your mind now, about stress.
Yeah, that's you're throwing me a softball here because this is actually been a couple of weeks since we've talked last, and there's been some just incredible news, specifically because it's an election year. And people are paying attention to the presidential debates, and they're also, there's been, just last night, there was a piece of news that I came across that said that there was an attempted assassination on the life of former President Trump. Mm-hmm. And so I think that things, especially with this being an election year, there's a lot of stressors out there.
Yes.
Maybe even more so than in any other year, especially people who spend a lot of time listening to television or YouTube, connected in some way to the internet. Headlines are constantly buzzing, and social media is just flooding people's attention with potential things that make them think in certain ways that exacerbate their feelings.
Yes. Yes.
And so there's a lot of other stressors out there that we could potentially talk about. And then also it would be really cool to talk about how different people respond to stress in healthy and unhealthy ways.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you actually mentioned some, and then we can dive in, but like the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East, and we didn't mention it last time, but I think about it every day, where 6 million children die every year unnecessarily because of lack of water and lack of food. And so, but just to list a couple of things, and we can go on and on and on. And the other point that we're going to be making, not only in terms of the healthy versus unhealthy responses to stress, but the source of stress, because we're pointing to the stress as if it's out in the world, but then there's the inner sources of stress, which depend on our perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's actually a very cool book that I think I'm going to mention I read earlier this year, Nonviolent Communication, by Marshall Rosenberg, I believe. And it really got me thinking more intensely about the different ways that different origins of stress internally within our bodies, and how our feelings relate to the way we think, and how the way we think often relates to things that either we're witnessing through our sensory perception, or through things that we maybe believe that we need through maybe possibly things that are like physiological factors. So our senses can dictate maybe our thoughts, and then our thoughts relate to our feelings. And so having kind of an understanding of where is it that our feelings originate from, or where they come from, might be very useful to also understand.
Yes. And as you mentioned that, I'm thinking about that the way we think is conditioned by the environment we're raised in. Just like thinking and speaking in English is inevitable if I'm born and raised here in the States, but thinking and speaking in German is inevitable if I'm born in Germany. So, but also not just the language that we think in, but the biases and the prejudices and the beliefs that we believe, which is why certain people are going to be MAGA Trump supporters and other people are going to be liberal Democrats. Well, who's right? And we get back to nonviolent communication, the belief, well, I'm right and you're wrong. That's the source of violent communication versus, well, wait a minute, let's make room for all the different perspectives and find out why you think the way you think. And if you're interested here, why I think what I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of different things that we could potentially talk about in this podcast. So I think we could definitely jump into, especially since politics is front and center. We can and you know how they say, don't talk about politics. Well, I think oftentimes it's like, don't talk about a particular subject is given to an audience or given as a general rule because there's the potential for upsetting someone, right?
Yes.
Or there's a potential for a kind of almost like a conflict between the view of the world.
Yes.
And so,
And that's I think a implied maybe source of stress in everything is the potential for conflict. That if you and I don't agree on something, it can lead to violence. Which is why I think the works of people like Marshall Rosenberg and Nonviolent Communication are so important, because one of the reasons we're all so stressed is because there is so much violence.
And so there's this book which I really highly recommend. It really talks about how to approach different topics with some nuance and some understanding, and kind of bring them to find some type of a common ground. And so I think, especially after yesterday's event, I think I've heard a lot of people calling for finding some kind of common ground. And not escalating things in ways that are just unproductive. My history a little bit. I've been through a divorce, and I've had different, almost like adversarial situations where I've had to find some way of living with another person in my life that I did not see eye to eye with for a very long time, because my son is now 17, and we had to co-parent since he was like 2 or 3 years old, after the separation and divorce and subsequent divorce. So having that as a little bit of my background for the listeners, I think might make sense to let them know that this is something that I've practiced quite a bit. And even though I've only read Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg recently, there's been other ways of talking and listening that I've tried to practice that helped to make things a little bit smoother, even with an adversarial party, someone who's not necessarily seeing eye to eye, or someone who is very much like out for themselves, trying to it's hard for me to totally know exactly what's going on in someone else's head. I think that's just the way that the people are. But you can at least, through certain principles, you can at least say, okay, this is what I'm going to own. This is something that I have some control over, and being aware of your own thoughts, feelings, and situation, I think is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it might be helpful to our listeners also to point out a little more specifically Rosenberg's point that violent communication is basically the belief and feeling I'm right and you're wrong, and you feeling the same thing. Well, no, I'm right and you're wrong, and now we can go to war. Mm-hmm. And Rosenberg points out that he had a friend who said the language of right and wrong didn't even exist 5,000 years ago. That what existed 5,000 years ago was the language of feelings and needs. Okay. Yeah. And then Rosenberg invites us, and his whole book is about learning to translate the language of I'm right and you're wrong into the language of, oh, you're feeling angry at me because you needed me to say hello to you. Is that right? So that we can learn to translate the language of right and wrong into the language of feelings and needs.
That's right.
And Rosenberg points out when our needs are being met, we feel fine. It's only when our needs are not being met that we don't feel fine. But if we can speak to the language of feelings and needs instead of I'm right and you're wrong, then we're much more likely to get our needs met in a nonviolent way.
Yeah, and so I absolutely. Just talking to you, I really appreciate you kind of sparking my memory a little bit about Marshall Rosenberg's way of looking at things. I really appreciate this. I really appreciate one of the things that I got out of that book was specifically asking someone, "Hey, is this where you're coming from, mm-hmm. or is this like what you're saying?" Mm-hmm. Because it allows us, as long as we're honest with each other, it allows us to check in and say, hey, do I understand you correctly, right? Yes. And if I understand either your thought or your feeling, I can get closer to understanding your perspective of the world.
Yes.
Right.
And going back to stress and sources of stress, part of the stress, and I'll never forget when I realized this, when we disagree, I typically was conditioned to want to convince you of my point of view instead of put my point of view aside and try to understand your point of view. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so part of what I see becomes violence and stress is each of us now is in a power struggle of who's going to see their point of view, right, and whose point of view is going to be heard.
Right.
You see, and now we're in a power struggle about whose point of view is more important.
So I think for our listeners, it would be really useful for us to maybe mention a good example, which is politics right now. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of politicians that are saying, hey, let's keep a cool head about this. Let's try to bring the country together. Let's not point fingers. And then there's other politicians that are pointing fingers, yes, and they're just like, oh, it's Biden's fault or whatever, yes, that somehow his rhetoric escalated, and people are saying, oh, well, we should cut down on the rhetoric now. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of fears about mm-hmm. like what they believe is causing it.
Yes.
Whereas really there's still very little information right now. And so there's a lot of unknown that people are kind of grappling with, struggling with. And so back to what you said, where, if we're encountering somebody whose point of view we don't necessarily agree with, or maybe we don't understand, would the first step actually be in just trying to understand it?
Yes. And the point I was going to make is I'll never forget the day I had the insight when I was talking with my quote enemy, and I'll be very, very clear, I'm a
Yeah.
extreme liberal, and I was a member of Refuse Fascism when Trump was first elected, and I would go on demonstrations, but
Yeah.
I always went to the counter demonstrators. I would cross the street.
Well, let's just make sure that people understand a peaceful extreme liberal.
A peace, yes, I'm completely committed to nonviolence.
Yes.
Completely committed to
Yes.
nonviolence. All the way back to the Vietnam War. I was born in 1950.
Yeah, actually, we
You
were
know,
just talking about
so,
that.
Yeah, so thank you
I'd
for
love,
that.
and I'd love to hear more about, maybe even how the time we live in now looks very similar to
Yes.
potentially the 1960s and
Yes.
civil rights movements and Vietnam War protests and things like that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
The thing that may be different is that there was a huge emphasis on pacifism and peace at that time, and now there's a huge emphasis on violence. And as a matter of fact, and I could be wrong, but I believe this: if the head of the family, whether it's the president or the father or the mother, is saying bullying is okay and violence against your enemies is okay, stand by. We're going to see an increasing amount of violence.
Or even shaking a fist,
Yes. Yes.
just after he gets clipped in
Yes.
the ear, and shaking a
Yes.
fist, and
Yes.
I think many commentators mentioned that it was like he had the look of saying fight on his lips,
of course,
right?
Yes.
Shaking his fist,
Yes.
pumping his arm, like
Yes.
almost like he's at like a sports rally or something like that.
Yes, it's a big fuck you. Excuse my language, but and on the other side, I heard about this. That it was at a certain point, Biden supposedly said we have to stop Trump at all costs. Well, that's like Trump saying stand by.
Right.
It can be taken that way, even if he didn't mean it that way, which may be one of the reasons that Biden went so quickly to say, no, we're one people, we're one unit, we have to stop this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I mean, to be fair to both sides, I think, I mean, there have been also situations where Biden has like used foul language, during the debate or whatever. He's, there's just been like, it's almost like one side can, whatever side starts to escalate it,
Yes.
it's almost like the other side can get caught up in it.
Yes.
And it just keeps on going.
Yes.
Yes.
And Rosenberg is really good about pointing how easy it is for violence to escalate. And to me, it's important to recognize that because it's not one person's fault or the other person's fault. It's the inability to translate the language of right and wrong into the language of feelings and needs. Because once we translate that language and it's not an easy translation. We haven't learned that language, but we can learn it. We can start then de-escalating when instead of convincing you I'm right, I want to understand. And I was going to mention earlier, I would go to my quote enemy, and because I noticed how much I wanted to convince him I was right, and I said no, that produces violence. Let me go over and try to understand. And I would start.
So who was your enemy in this situation?
The enemy,
just to
Trump
paint
supporters.
the picture a little bit
Trump
more.
supporters.
Okay.
Yes. And there's even a picture of me on Facebook with me facing with a big, huge guy who's a Trump supporter, and I've got my Refuse Fascism sign, and we're talking. But the first thing I would say is there's space in this universe for both of our points of view. I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to let you hurt me. I want to understand your point of view.
So tell me more about this interaction that you had with the protester. How did it start, or how did it happen?
Well, I would make a point of, and it wasn't just this one, I would do this. This was sort of my MO, to go to the other side to understand.
Yeah.
Not to convince them that they're wrong and I'm right, but to understand why do you support Trump? Why do you believe what you believe? Now, the short term of that, and again, I would start because, again, I'm a complete pacifist and want to make the world a safer place because part of stress is how unsafe the world is.
Yeah.
And I realized whatever I do, my aspiration is to be a non-threatening president on this planet. Whatever I do, okay?
Yeah.
And so I would go and say, I'm from the other side, but in the universe, there's plenty of room for both of our points of view. I'm not here to change your point of view. You're not going to change my point of view, but I'm here to understand how you came to your point of view. Would you be willing to explain it to me? And they would. Okay? Every time they would.
Yeah.
And then the interesting thing to me is, because the thing I discovered is we want the same thing, Martin. We want the same thing. We just don't agree on how to get it. And the thing we want, which we pointed to earlier, is security, safety. Okay? We want to feel safe and secure. Well, the point is they believe safety and security is in an M15 or in an atomic bomb. Right. I believe safety and security is in getting rid of weapons. So, but once we saw that, and I could see and they could see that we want the same thing. I'll never forget this man who once said to me, looked at me and he says, "Oh, so not all of you are dumb shits on your side. I love to see that some of you are thoughtful, intelligent, caring people. Thank you."
Yeah.
And this is the kind of experience that would happen when we would risk crossing the bridge. But earlier you said I was brave. Well, I knew that my mission was nonviolence.
Yeah.
And that would be, doing that may help to bring down the experience of threat in the world.
Yeah. 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 It's so one thing I'm hearing is that you talk to him in a very curious way. Like you were honestly very interested in what was his perspective on this, right?
Yes.
And then also the other thing that I can see from this, from at least your interaction, is that there's this humanity that kind of can come out where you can see that somebody, even though you may think that the solution is different, you're after the same thing, which in some cases is security, and in many cases I think people are when people are scared, they want some security, right? And so this universal thing that we're after is maybe we want to protect our families or something like that, right? Well, in certain situations, that's like, some people think that it's by having a gun handy. In other situations, when you're thinking about, your kids in a classroom somewhere where you're not there, and you'd rather that people have less access to firearms, especially the people that should not be anywhere near firearms, teenagers or people that have some kind of mental condition or something like that really makes them unsafe with them, not understanding the full repercussions of the tool that you have in your hands. So, yeah, it's there's so one thing that I'm curious about is, and I'm you're retired mental health counselor, right? So you've had many experiences with understanding people and bridging kind of the gap between what is and getting to understand their perspective. There's also ways to learn nonviolent protest. Is it for you? Has it been kind of a mix of those two that lets you cross that threshold where to get to understand the other side, or is it something else?
Well, I'm not sure, Martin, but what, and again, it was reading Rosenberg, among others, that really helped me, identify that the problem was when we don't feel safe, we can revert to violence. and that only makes us, it might make me feel safe in the short term, but in the long term, it makes me feel less safe. So it became really clear to me that the solution to stress in that sense was recognizing, becoming aware of how unsafe we're all feeling, and then do my part to help myself and help you, my enemy, feel safe by knowing there's no way I'm going to hurt you. And there's no way I'm going to try to get rid of you. You see, it's one of the things that I think the white supremacist mentality doesn't understand about people of color, that people of color aren't interested in getting rid of white people or of restricting them. They're just interested in making room for themselves on an equitable basis, which is very different than the original white supremacist idea of getting rid of the indigenous population and enslaving the African population.
Sure.
And so they still don't realize. But the point I'm making is that if we're making room for everybody, how can we all live, no matter what our beliefs, no matter what our, where we're all meeting this need for feeling safe enough. None of us is going to feel entirely safe, but safe enough by knowing there's no way I'm going to hurt you. Hey, I'll let you hurt me before I hurt you.
And it comes to down to what I'm hearing is this idea of trying to solve how do we all get along? How do we all get along, even with both of us in the same place?
Yes.
Both of us trying to create the space that we each need. That to me strikes me as a very American problem or American ideal that we're working on.
Yes.
And I think that's a very it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And also, I don't know if it's okay for me to mention that you're, for people who didn't listen to the first podcast, that you're a Mexican. You grew up in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right. So your family is part Mexican. Is that correct?
Yeah, my dad is Mexican. My mother is American from Boston.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So so it's it's just fascinating to me, like just to hear that, also like so this kind of non-violence, and this has been kind of taught by a lot of different groups that are in of the idea that nonviolent protests are more effective than violent protests. So Gandhi is a great example. They Solidarność, which was actually, I think, also based off of teachings of nonviolent protest that were seen in India, happened in Poland, where 10 million people went on strike simultaneously all across all industries against a corrupt Soviet shadow government that was trying to run the country. And so what ended up happening is the entire economy ground to a halt. People were still supporting each other, but they were not doing things that would bring in the people in power any money. And so they had no choice but to open up fair elections to the people. And then eventually Poland left the Soviet bloc, and some people believe that led to the domino effect of the Berlin Wall collapsing many years after the Solidarność movement, which was, I think, in 1982. So my family actually left Poland around that time because of the threat of violent suppression of that protest by the government. But I'm just proud to say that's that was something that my family in Poland still remembers that happened, and that was a very effective way of protesting against unfair treatment, where you see it. And so back in the 60s, that was also Martin Luther King actually had someone from who had visited India, who was part of his group of ministers that had been planning civil rights movement within the United States. So it's it's interesting to hear that this is something that people can still do very effectively, and also getting to understand the other side, getting to understand their fears, getting to understand that can bring people together. It takes a little bit of time, takes some honesty, right? But this could be a way of dealing with a lot of different types of stress. And we mentioned a bunch of different stresses, not just political stresses, but like the climate crisis or economics, guns. So I think we just mentioned like also the guns. Being able to protect your family or being able to protect yourself. There's a lot of issues that are related to us making decisions, sometimes without understanding the full ramifications of what the decisions are, right? And in the last podcast, you mentioned not to make decisions until you're in a good state of mind, like in a healthy state of mind. So this is maybe we can kind of reflect a little bit on how is it that someone can kind of understand if they're in a good state of mind, or if they're in a healthy state of mind when making a decision.
Yeah, well, and to repeat from last time, and what you're saying brings up a point, but I would say in a healthy state of mind we feel safe. In a healthy state of mind, you can point a gun in my face and I still feel safe. Okay? In an unhealthy state of mind, you're a pacifist, but I'm imagining that you have a gun and you're going to shoot me. Okay? So that ultimately the other way I said it in the last podcast is, in a healthy state of mind, we basically feel I'm okay, you're okay, it's going to be okay. So in a healthy state of mind, if you're pointing a gun to me, if you shoot and kill me, it's going to be okay. Why do I say that? Because I know I've got to die somehow and sometime. I'll never forget, this is a true story of Byron Katie, who a gun was put in her face, and she said to the person, "Oh, don't do that," not because she was scared. In her mind, she's going, "Oh, is this the way I die, and is this the time that I die?" She was scared for him, who would spend the rest of his life in jail. So he said, "Please don't do that." And he says, "No, I must." And she goes, "Okay," and then just stands there waiting, noticing his eyes and noticing the beauty around her, just waiting. And in the peace of that, he decided not to kill her and walked away. Okay, so that's a healthy state of mind. In a healthy state of mind, we essentially feel that we're okay, that we're safe. Even now, this is another point I want to make. You when you were talking, it kind of started implying like, well, pacifism is the way. Well, I was thinking about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and he completely disagreed with that approach. And I'm thinking of another friend who just went and he decided, I need to get a gun and learn to shoot the gun. So the point I'm making is, the very thing that makes my friend feel safe scares the hell out of me. And the very thing that makes me feel safe scares the hell out of him. Okay, so here's the big question again. How do we make room for both? You see, but understanding that what we share is the need to feel safe. Okay, and we're never going to do that when I don't make room for my friend to have a gun and to learn how to shoot the gun. You see, even though it scares the hell out of me.
Sure.
But in a healthy state of mind, I go, it's okay. That's okay. It's not what I agree with. It's not where I'm coming from. But now I've made room for both. And that's what ultimately, in my mind, makes me feel safer.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of almost like coming together as two people that are going to play a game and understand what the concern is and then deciding, here's a set of rules we can both agree on by which we play the game.
Yes.
Like in jiu-jitsu, which I've been training, they have a set of rules where if you're training with someone, there's certain moves you can't do. There's certain moves that are known to be less safe. And so in the course of training, we both recognize that that's less safe for both of us to continue training. And so we decide, okay, we're not going to have ankle locks, or we're not going to have, because those moves are, it takes like a fraction of a second to get that move on. And if the other person doesn't recognize what you're doing, or if they're not as familiar, they decide, well, then that could actually cause a very serious injury. It could cause a knee dislocation. So what they agree on is, or what we agree on is that we're not going to use those moves up until we're at a high belt level. And even then, we recognize, because we understand the danger of that move, we usually slow it down when we're doing that, when we're using that move, when we're practicing that move. Both people sometimes have a conversation just before training, especially if they're good training partners. And you almost never use those moves when you're training with somebody that's new, or somebody that's like new to the gym, maybe doesn't know the etiquette. So we have a code of conduct that's up on the wall that we encourage everybody to read. So to understand that. So in this situation, probably be like, you and your friend getting together and saying, hey, do we at least agree on, if somebody had done some kind of a violent crime, at least having a background check before selling them firearms. And how about we get rid of, we make gun sales that are not in licensed stores illegal, so that we can at least agree that somebody who shouldn't have access to a gun on the street that has not been licensed with a firearm, is not of a certain age, should not have access to, or a certain type of sound mind, and not having a background check done, should not have a gun. So at least playing a game by the rules, I think we can agree on.
Yeah,
and that's ultimately what society, I think, is us playing by the rules.
And then there's the problem that the rules that exist currently, and I'm thinking of the gun laws, create a lot of unsafety for many of us, and for parents and the kids in the school shootings and so on and so forth. But they create safety for those who are proponents of these don't restrict the gun laws, because the rules are minimal restrictions.
Right. Yeah.
And so. Yeah. Now the question,
the rules are the absence of rules.
The rules are the absence of rules. So how do we, who don't agree with those rules, promote safer rules in a nonviolent way? Would be, and then how do we live with the fact that the rules that I'm living with scare the hell out of me in terms of my daughter going to school?
Maybe it's and it's kind of almost like urging us to revisit what the rules are. I just remember the famous quote by Martin Luther King that a just law is no law at all.
Yes.
Or an unjust law is no law at all.
Yes.
And that's so. In other words, taking a look at the law and what was the spirit of the law, what was at the heart of why a law was put into place, and revisiting that and saying, well, in the context of our society now, does that make sense?
Yes.
In the context of what we've learned, and what we can, what evidence we can point at right now that may have not been known all the way back then when that law was initially being made.
Yes.
Do we have some need to adjust or modify the law?
Yes.
It kind of comes back to like this. I remember watching a documentary on prohibition in the U.S. and how prohibition in general was this law that was about trying to restrict the sale of alcohol, because I think the amount of alcohol that was being drank back in the 1800s was higher than the GDP of the entire country. And so in order to reduce the amount of alcohol that was being drunk, they basically said, well, we're gonna have anything that, I believe it's like above 0.5% or 0.3%, I forget what the exact percentage is. Anything that's above that is going to be now outlawed. And so there were communities of immigrants that had come, or of people from different religious beliefs that had alcohol as part of their culture, and they protested. And so because the law was so rigid that they didn't allow for an adjustment, that's ultimately why the law failed. Like they had the opportunity to go to that law and say, well, hey, how about beer? Like, beer is not as bad as whiskey, or it's not as potent as whiskey, which was really where a lot of the alcoholism was being caused by. But they didn't take the steps to. They were so extreme in that law. They were so adamant that no, we're going to keep the law as is, rather than making any kind of concessions to people who wanted to drink beer with their buddies, after work on Friday night or something like that. They made it so rigid that ultimately people saw it as an unjust law. And so the enforcement wasn't nearly strong enough to actually to enforce it compared to the level of unjustness that people saw and the steps that people were doing to circumvent the law. So it ultimately failed. But I can kind of see that this, having it extreme on one end or the other, where you're either prohibiting it to an extent which is unjust, or making it so free that it's like it is impacting people's safety. That can also be unjust, for people that want to have a safe society to live in.
So as you were saying that, two points that I want to just sort of highlight and come back to. One is the usefulness of protesting and not giving up the protesting in a nonviolent way until the law changes and becomes a just law instead of an unjust law. That's in the interest of everybody, not in the interest of the handful of people that are supporting that law and who have the power. But the other thing that I've noticed is how I tend to dehumanize those people that don't want more restrictive gun laws. I tend to see them as evil. I tend to see them as stupid. I dehumanize them. And the minute I dehumanize them, I want to beat them up. I want to get rid of them. So what I'm getting at is noticing, again, I said earlier, the first step is the step of awareness, noticing that violent impulse at me that comes from dehumanizing them. And then realizing, no, they're just as human as I am. And they want the same thing that I do. We just don't agree. And so the importance in my mind in terms of living in a way where we're reducing the threats is to notice when we've dehumanized each other and so we can rehumanize each other.
Yeah, and what I'm actually seeing, and I think if we had a chance to have a video of this of what you just said, what I was just seeing is actually that you're recognizing almost like the caricature of the person that you're being there, and then understanding that's your feelings attached to this fear, this thought, in some way that is a threat that's coming at you.
Yeah.
But it's not. But it really, like, the person is there and not. They're how can I put it? They're not like the shooter at a rally that does require aggressive intervention.
Mm-hmm.
They're someone who is voicing an opinion based on whatever it is that's forming that opinion.
Mm-hmm.
What maybe it could be that they're maybe it could be that they're watching news that is giving them partial information, or they're watching they were brought up around guns, that guns were always in the family or whatever, and I've got an arsenal of goodies here that I've trained with, that I'm fully capable of using, and how dare you take away my toys?
Yeah.
How dare you take away my
Yes.
like my memories with my dad going hunting,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. It's that kind of maybe perspective that they have, but it's what you're saying is that you're not when you approach it, you recognize that, and you can say, okay, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to be the one that's going to be escalating this.
Right.
I'm going to try to understand what is the situation here right now,
Mm-hmm.
and get kind of to the bottom of it, and at the bottom is ultimately probably where we find commonality, where we can kind of say, hey,
Yes.
if we can talk as people, we recognize that each of us has needs that we share, especially as citizens of a country. We're in the same country. There's we're not at war with each other.
Well, not overtly.
not overtly, right?
Yeah.
maybe a war of words in some ways, right? But yeah. So that's actually some other things. There's another sources of stress. We see a lot of wars out there, out in the world, and something that is probably also very similar, very parallel in terms of history is people have been comparing I think just a couple of weeks ago, Senator Bernie Sanders, he gave this very interesting comparison where the Vietnam War, he said that so let me just try to think a little bit more about how he phrased it. I think he said that that the fact that the U.S. is funding the Israeli government in bombing areas that are full of Palestinians, that's recognized by many as an unjust war by the Israeli government, and that we should be able to criticize governments for what they do. It's not a racist thing, as some people are saying, that if you're against Israel, you're actually anti-Semitic. It's more that we just don't believe that violence has a place in resolving these kinds of conflicts. That you don't fight this. You don't try to bomb someone into submission in order for them to release hostages. That's not the way to go. And so what Bernie Sanders said was that the fact that people are very upset with Biden's handling of this situation, this could be Biden's Vietnam War, because Lyndon B. Johnson was voted out as a result of his, or he stepped down actually. He stepped down because he saw how unpopular he was with the public related to the Vietnam War, and he decided that he's not going to run for a second term as a result of that. So there's many different wars around the world that are being waged, and I think a lot of people are very concerned about that. That's also bringing up stress. You know, we see how Ukraine is fighting Russian invasions, how different people, and I think, as I mentioned last time we talked, there may be other wars that don't hit the headlines as heavily, but they are out there. So this can also be related, almost this feeling can also be related the same way to maybe the climate crisis. You know, this is kind of a war that humanity is facing. There's going to be an increase of, I was just reading the headlines, in Florida, they're predicting, I'm trying to remember if it's like several feet. It's a substantial increase up to 2030 of the level of water, the sea level rise, and a lot along with all of that, you know, unprecedented high temperatures that people are facing, that is not just weather; it's actually the climate increasing. So it's a larger force that is not going to be going away, like weather does seasonally. It's going to be something that's going to persist and is going to radically alter the patterns that we're seeing throughout the world. So, you know, there's kind of almost like this feeling like, hey, well, how can I do anything about this? You know, just feeling so small about it or something like that. And you know, there's other feelings that kind of relate to that. Maybe it ultimately probably has to do with fear, but it's not like this instant fear. It's almost like this maybe of a sadness or like a melancholy that, you know, what can I do about this? You know, or I'm too small to impact how things are going, right?
And that feeling of helplessness, that feeling of being so small, again, is another source of stress, because we're talking about not having any power to have any impact to change some of these things that are so unjust and so violent and so inequitable. And ultimately, investing my security in having power is going to make me feel more insecure, because I don't have the power. But I do have the power to, and earlier you mentioned this, and I don't know, we're looking at time and where we wind down and so on.
Yeah, sure.
But earlier you mentioned this, is how do we know what's true? How do we know what's real? And so ultimately, what's the real solution to the violence, the climate crisis, when those in power deny there's even a climate crisis? When those in power, when the authoritarians are in power, bombing Ukraine, you know,
right.
When the authoritarians are in power, bombing Palestine,
right?
You know, how do we? Again, how do we? To me, it's inherently stressful. But now, in a secure state of mind, I see how natural and inevitable that stress and that grief you're referring to, and the reality of my powerlessness. But I'm not powerless to know and to study. For example, I'm not going to bring this. I'm going to mention it, but a whole other. The one solution to all the problems we're describing could be a resource-based economy that was developed by Jacques Fresco in the Venus Project, And why? Because to him, the fundamental foundation of a resource-based economy is the acknowledgement that every human, I add every living entity on the planet, has equal rights to the resources of this planet. Versus who's going to be the most powerful country, China or the U.S. or Russia, or who's going to have the most power. No. How do we equitably distribute the resources on this planet so everybody has equal access to them by right? Sure. Until we have that fundamental principle, we're going to create situations that are really stressful for certain populations and not stressful for others. Right. Ultimately.
Right. And I think that related to that would be, how do you, so you're saying that, like, and this is, you know, we may be going a little bit deep into this, but I'm just going to pull it back a little bit. When we find something that scares us, right? There's the potential for getting aggressive, right? Getting hating someone. So in other words, dehumanizing them. Getting sad, where we're like, well, we're gonna shrink back. We're gonna make ourselves small. We're gonna running away. Just take ourselves out of the situation in whatever way that looks. Maybe it's like, I'm just gonna go and play video games, not think about like the climate crisis that's happening. I'm gonna go watch comedy on TV or something, just take my mind off things or whatever. So those kind of, but then, like, if there's like a healthy underpinning of like how you're looking at the world, where I'm okay, you're okay, it'll be okay. And kind of maybe even getting to that point that we talked about, where you're seeing that your needs are met, that in other words, you can take a perspective of like, well, I live in America, and for the most part, right now, at least we're sitting right now in a house that is not too hot, not too cold. We're probably feeling a little bit of the summer in here, but it's not adversely affecting us. We're not really seeking or needing very much. Maybe a breath once in a while. And we're enjoying each other's company, and I think that's helping. That's contributing a little bit to that. But the thing that in those types of situations where there's not a lot of certainty, we tend to start looking for answers, right? And that if you're in a place where your needs are for the most part satisfied, or you're not seeking satisfaction, which is what we talked about in the first episode, you can start to look at things and start to address things and evaluate and see, is this something related to an answer, a possible answer? And so, and again, this is something that once you've got an even keel, you can kind of understand this is a better way to get at answers and get at solutions to problems that are there. So that's I wonder if there's did I kind of hit on how responding to stress in healthy and unhealthy ways makes sense, or is there something else that you wanted to add?
Yes, there's one aspect that we haven't talked about, but you mentioned I'm okay, it's going to be okay in relation to all of the stressors that we're looking at in the world. But it also applies to the stressors in our inner world, in our thoughts and feelings. And you talked about how we distract from our sadness, and so again, in the inner world, I'm not okay, I'm feeling sad, I shouldn't be feeling sad, versus I'm sad, and Marshall Rosenberg beautifully points out, when our needs are being met, we're comfortable. When our needs are not being met, we're uncomfortable. So when I'm sad, it's because there's a need that isn't being met. When I'm angry, it's because there's a need that isn't being met. When I'm scared, is because there's a need that isn't being met. So we can go from, I shouldn't feel this way, and how do I avoid these feelings? Again, the first step to being aware, I'm scared, and that's okay. Why? Because this need that I have isn't being met and can't be met given the current gun laws. I'm sad, and that's okay. I'm okay being sad because my daughter is not responding to my texts, and I need her to respond to my texts. You see, or I'm angry because the need for safety isn't being met. So now it's the same in relation to our inner world of thoughts and feelings. I'm upset, I'm stressed, and it's okay.
Yeah.
See, I call that meeting stress without stress, as opposed to meeting stress with stress and saying, I shouldn't be stressed. How do I avoid and resist my stress and distract from my stress? And no, I should be. Why? Because there's some need that isn't being met.
Yeah. And it's the opposite of kind of suppressing and just saying, it's not okay that I'm feeling this way. How do I make this feeling go away? And so then you start down the path of seeking and trying to fill that need with something. And whether it be whether it be an aggressive kind of tone, or whether it be like, this sucks, I'm going to drop out of life, and, I don't know, I think that in a lot of situations they talk about how a lot of shooters and like potential people that get involved with gun violence tend to be loners, and a lot of people that tend to have this situation where they feel rejected, and so then they say, well, it's not okay for me to feel rejected. I'm just not going to associate with anyone anymore. And so they go off and they become this so-called lone wolf, in society, where they don't have people around them because they've chosen to check out of society, and they're not. Then they start having problems with other things related to the lack of having a social circle, a social network that watches out for them, and they can watch out for their friends as well, and not being able to have that kind of very basic need for humans to socialize amongst each other, and all of the good things that come with it, like the great ideas that we share, between the two of us, and it comes from this almost like fear or sadness or hurt from being hurt at one point, and feeling that feeling is like, okay, well, I just don't want any part of that, and so shutting down the emotions or shutting down that side of things.
If we go from avoiding and resisting these feelings to asking, well, what need isn't being met? Then, if I notice what need isn't being met, I can go about getting that need met, or I can acknowledge that need can't be met in the current political situation. But then I ask, what keeps me needing something that can't be met? You see, so the minute I recognize that need can't be met, I stop needing it. for now, but I keep fighting for the law to change.
Sure.
But I no longer expect that need to be met because I recognize that need can't be met right now, maybe ever.
Yeah.
As you were talking about the shooter, I'm thinking of the hopelessness that my need will ever be met. And one of the things, I'll never forget this, as a young little boy who had needs that couldn't be met. And one of the revenge, well, I can't get my need met, but you'll see I can get even.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And now the need got met. When my need can't be met and I'm hopeless that my need can be met, the last straw is I can get even.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
My need to get even.
Yeah.
Hey.
Huh. Yeah. And ultimately, I mean, that's a very, sad place to be because it's such a short-term outlook on things, and like not looking at anything else in the life. The effect on their parents, the effect on their friends, the effect on themselves too. When they're ultimately found and caught and incarcerated, or maybe they don't feel like that's even going to happen, because they end their life or whatever. But that's it's and so having some awareness of that, of those feelings, and the needs that sometimes underpin some of the things that we're looking for, and coming up with getting to a place where we feel comfortable enough so that we can start to assess valid options for getting our needs met in day-to-day life.
Yes.
Right. I think that's that's something that coming back to that nonviolent communication book is something that has been something that's been very useful, especially since we operate in a society with many other people in it, where we don't always have that straightforward communication. We sometimes get communication lines mixed up, and even within ourselves, the communication that we have in our own heads sometimes with like, well, why am I stuck on this? Why can't I break through on this problem that I've been facing for so long? And coming back and saying, oh well, let's be compassionate with ourselves. Let's take a step back. We've been hammering on this for like so long now. We're beating ourselves up. We're really burning ourselves out on this problem. What if we start to say, okay, well, how about I make progress, just a smaller thing, on a smaller thing towards that goal, and then seeing that as like compounding over time, and that progress compounding over time, and eventually turning into, something from as little as, sit-ins back in the civil rights movement, to demonstrations, to different types of marches from town to town, and ultimately in getting a law passed that helps to protect the rights of citizens in this country. So related to what we discussed in this podcast, it's very important to have a good understanding of how our feelings are helpful, and in some cases can be unhelpful depending on our state of mind, and the behaviors generally that emerge from having the different feelings that we have. So I think in the next podcast would be a really great topic for us to discuss those, so that we can get a better understanding of how feelings are useful to us.
Yes. And you remind me that I think that's a great place to kind of come to an end. And you remind me of this beautiful quote. I believe his name was Michael Brown. in a book called The Consciousness Process, where he says it's not about feeling good, it's about getting good at feeling. And the point is, none of us is good at feeling because we haven't had, quote, the permission to feel. But yeah, I think it'd be a great place to explore is that question about our feelings in relationship to feelings. And
Yeah, I totally agree. I can't wait for the next episode. So, yeah, we'll stop there.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Ricardo.
Yeah.
Cheers.